The notification arrived at 0847 Standard Galactic Time, and Mara Ellison read it twice. Cadet Ellison, M. Species Assessment, Human. Combat Tier, Non-Combatant. Recommended placement, administrative, diplomatic, or support services. She set down her coffee, real coffee, smuggled from Earth at considerable expense, and stared at the ceiling of her dormitory for exactly 4 seconds. Then she got dressed. The assessment hall of the Interstellar Military Academy occupied the entire eastern wing of the station, a cavernous structure of pale alloy and soft lighting, designed, as the brochure explained, to minimize stress responses during evaluation. Mara thought it looked like the inside of a very expensive egg. Professor Cale Veyron stood at the central console, reviewing overnight data. He was Valanthy, tall, gray-skinned, with 4 upper limbs and a brow ridge that could shelter a small bird. He had administered assessments for 31 years. He had never once reversed a classification. He looked up when the doors opened. The human cadet crossed the floor without invitation, without appointment, and without any of the nervous energy he'd come to associate with cadets who disputed their results. Most of them came in trembling. Some came in crying. A Keth warrior from the 7th intake had tried to headbutt the console. This one just walked up and placed her datapad on his desk, classification notice face up. "There's been a mistake," she said. Veyron looked at her. Looked at the datapad. Looked back at her. "Miss Ellison." He laced 2 of his hands together in the formal gesture of measured patience. "I understand this result is disappointing. However, the assessment matrix is outdated," she said. "By about 200 years. He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Mara pulled up a chair without being asked, sat down, and folded her hands on the desk. She had the particular stillness of someone who had decided exactly how this conversation was going to go. "Your assessment matrix was built on data collected during first contact surveys," she said. "Humans in the 22nd century. Before the Titan Accords, before deep gravity habituation programs, before mandatory survival conditioning became standard curriculum in Earth schools." She tilted her head. "When's the last time your matrix was updated?" Veyron's brow ridge lowered slightly. "The matrix incorporates 47th session Galactic Standard. I looked it up this morning." She slid the datapad closer to him, a secondary document now visible beneath the classification notice. "That's 68 years ago." "Do you know what happened to humans 68 years ago?" He did not answer, which she correctly interpreted as no. "We decided we were too soft," she said pleasantly. "So we fixed it." The next 2 hours were, by Veyron's private estimation, the most unusual of his career. The human cadet, non-combatant, his console still read, and it was beginning to feel like an accusation, proceeded to walk him through the last 6 decades of human biological and conditioning development with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had prepared for this exact conversation. "Average human pain threshold has increased 40% since the matrix baseline," she said, pulling up a comparative chart. "That's not augmentation, that's conditioning. We run pain tolerance programs starting at age 12. Voluntary." She said the last word like it still surprised her a little. "Atmospheric pressure training begins at 9. Cold exposure habituation, 8. Our top infantry graduates can function in -40 without suit heating for up to 6 hours." Veyron studied the charts. They were, he noted with growing discomfort, sourced entirely from Academy-accessible public records. "The combat reflex data," he began, "is based on Valanthy reflex speeds," she said. "Your species is faster." "Absolutely. No argument. But the matrix weights reflex speed as the primary combat indicator." She brought up another document. "That's not actually how humans fight." "How do humans fight?" She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. It wasn't arrogance. It was something quieter than that. something that had been waiting a long time to be asked. We absorb damage, she said. We keep going. A Valanthi warrior at 40% physical capacity is compromised. A human at 40% capacity is annoyed. She paused. We also do this thing where we decide something is possible and then we make it possible through sheer, bloody-minded repetition until our bodies agree with us. We've been doing it for 200,000 years. It's basically our whole thing. Veyron was quiet for a moment. That's not a measurable metric. No, she agreed. That's why your matrix missed it. He ran the new assessment at 1,100 hours. It was not standard procedure. It was, in fact, so far outside standard procedure that Veyron privately composed 3 different justification memos in his head while calibrating the equipment. He settled on anomalous data requiring manual verification and decided he could live with that. The practical assessment for combat Tier 1 candidates involved a gauntlet, 20 minutes of escalating physical and cognitive stress, designed to simulate field conditions. The pass threshold for non-human candidates was adjusted for species-typical parameters. For humans, the matrix had always simply applied a flat moderate difficulty setting, because the records indicated humans were fragile and needed accommodation. He set it to Tier 1 standard. Mara stepped into the chamber, rolled her neck once, and said, "Ready when you are." 17 minutes and 43 seconds later, she stepped out. She had a split lip. Her left sleeve was torn. There was a burn mark across her right forearm from the plasma discharge sequence that was meant to cause immediate voluntary withdrawal. She had walked through it. "How," said Veyron, who had administered this assessment 412 times and had never seen anyone walk through the plasma discharge sequence, "is your arm not?" "Burns are cauterized on contact," she said, examining it with mild interest. "Hurts later. Right now it's mostly numb." She looked up at him. "Did I pass?" He looked at his console. Combat Tier 1. Classification, Death World Combatant. There it was. He had not seen that classification in 11 years, and the last time had been a Keth berserker from a heavy gravity colony who had bench-pressed the assessment equipment. "Yes," he said. "You passed." Mara nodded, like this was the only reasonable outcome, and picked up her datapad from his desk. "I'll need the updated documentation before 1300, she said. "I have tactical simulation at 1400 and I'd like to be in the right cohort." She paused at the door. "You might want to update the matrix, by the way. I'm probably not the only one this has happened to." She left. Veyron stood in his assessment hall for a long moment, listening to the hum of the station around him. 31 years. 412 assessments. He had believed, genuinely believed, that the matrix was comprehensive. He pulled up the species database on his console and navigated to the human entry. Last updated, 47th session Galactic Standard. He stared at it. Then he opened a new document and began to type. 3 weeks later, a memo circulated through the Academy administration. It was dry, technical, unremarkable in tone, the kind of document that only people with very specific jobs ever read. Assessment Matrix, Human Species Parameters. Following manual review and updated data integration, human physiological and combat metrics have been revised. Effective immediately, human cadets will be assessed under modified parameters reflecting current conditioning standards. Estimated impact, reclassification of approximately 34% of current human enrollment from non-combatant to active combat tiers. In the tactical simulation bay, Mara Ellison was running her 4th scenario of the afternoon with her new cohort, a mixed unit of Keth, Valanthi, and 2 other humans who'd had their classifications revised the week before. Her Keth squadmate, a wall of gray muscle named Orith, had asked her, on the first day, why she smiled so much during the hard scenarios. She had thought about it. "Humans are bad at quitting," she said finally. "Once we decide something is ours, we just sort of Keep going until it is. She shrugged. I decided this was mine a long time ago. Orith had looked at her with the particular expression that non-humans sometimes got around humans, something between respect and the mild existential concern of realizing you were standing next to something that technically shouldn't work. You are a very strange species, he said. Mara grinned, and the simulation started, and she went to work. Non-combatant. Somewhere in the administrative archive, the original assessment sat in a file, quietly incorrect. It had lasted exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes. For a human, that was basically forever.